I'm Verity Rabbit, freshly baked and ready to give you the truth as I see it. So, here we go. Another movie based on a video game. The history of such hasn't gone too well. From the disaster that was Super Mario Bros. In '91, even the star's actor Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo mentioned how they had to get drunk to continue with the film's production, because even they knew that it was one of the most awful things ever. And well, it really was. To the more popular attempt at Tomb Raider, or Tomb Raiders, starring Angelina Jolie at one point, and most recently anybody that you can dress from the children's section of PacSun. While these movies were hit and miss, they tended to mostly be a miss. With so many gamers that had been in love with the idea of their games and heroes being brought to life, over the years, and with disappointment rearing its ugly head again and again, many of the gamers grew callous to their hopes being dashed to pieces like many a Donkey Kong barrel. Take, for example, one of the most recent attempts, which was Pixels. How could you possibly mess this up? A really goofy movie where guys just go and attack 8-bit video game characters. It was based on a 3D short originally, and all you had to do was make a funny Adam Sandler joke and shoot. It seems like most of the acting was phoned in, especially Adam Sandler. Even the actors seem to know it's going to be a pretty bad movie here too. Heck, to add insult to injury, they even put a scene in there where Q*bert turns into a girl and Josh Gad has sex with it to produce a bunch of baby Q*berts. Really? I'm not joking. This was in the movie. Yeah, they are mostly disasters no matter how you place them together. And these movies have come and gone without much fanfare. Just a slight critique and an empty box office. How many of you remember Warcraft? See my point? The latest in this attempt is Rampage, a video game that came out in the arcade some 30-odd years ago. The game had a simple premise. Choose a monster, attack a city, and eat things. Most of the excitement of that game was that it was one of the first co-op arcade games with that level of great graphics for the time. I mean, it was the 80s, and that was fantastic computer graphics for back then. So it was a very simple premise and very simple execution. It didn't need much more to be fun. Rampage's movie attempt stars Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who's not new to the video game movie genre. He starred in 2005's Doom. We wish he hadn't. But since that time, he has gone through the ringer with many a cheesy film. As soon as you hear the name Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, you tend to pick up vibes of cheesy movies with explosions and disastrous events. And the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson saving the world. Well, let me be honest. This one is really not that much different. But is that really a bad thing? I usually disregard these types of movies as having no substance whatsoever. But in peering in a little more, I start to see something. Something interesting. Something material. Because at the end of this ride, I actually enjoyed it. It didn't give me a deeper sense of self or anything near. But it felt good. I felt good. Positive. Now, ride along with me on my adventure to what brought this about, and very well may with you too. The film starts off in quite a rush to get to the exciting bits. Apparently, a gene-changing experimental formula was created that got shot into a lab rat in space and started causing all sorts of chaos into the lab. And only one scientist escaped the area with a few vials of the formula before the space lab blew up. And this is how the formula spreads onto Earth and the few unwitting animals as its victims. One, of course, ends up being Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's rare albino gorilla buddy, George, who lives in a San Diego sanctuary where Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is his caretaker and the head primatologist there. They both have a friendly, buddy-like relationship with each other as they communicate and joke via sign language. Well, George gets a dose of this chemical, and it starts altering him into a way bigger and much more aggressive gorilla monster thing. We also see this happen elsewhere in the US, giving us more of the monsters that we originally saw in the video game. Joe Manganiello plays the leader of a group of mercenaries that hunts down one of these creatures. It also gives us the opportunity to see him play an action star, as we are still hoping to see him go toe-to-toe with Batman as Deathstroke, and hopefully the redeeming of the DC movie universe, if that ever happens. Yeah, make sure you don't put your faith in that one. But in this movie, he does play the part well as he leads the group to chase after a 40-foot tall monstrosity. The more the movie goes forward, we see these animals get more and more bloodthirsty, and the film does not spare us from the action and the lunch that humans tend to make, just like the video game. Interspersed in the film is a cast of characters that come on board, like Naomie Harris, who is a scientist that worked with the group that created the chemical experiment originally. She played nicely opposite Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who plays a cocksure government agent, Harvey Russell, who at first I thought would be an agitator in the film, with his cowboy-like attitude, but turned out to be something not as stereotypical, which I was happy to see. And the three characters' interaction was actually rather pleasant, and added to the enjoyment of the film. The antagonists of the film are the owners of the corporation responsible for the experiment gone wrong. Claire Wyden, played by Malin Ackerman, who looks a bit odd. I don't know if she's had much work done on her face, or maybe it's been longer than I thought since we all stared luridly at her in Watchmen. And her brother, Brett, played by a guy who was in The Office for a while, I think. Like most of the film, they played it like cartoon villains in their acting and general behavior, from the way they treated their employees to how they dealt with the authorities. But that's the big thing. It was all mostly a cartoon. So implausible. And I think that's what made the film. Mostly. The film's characters end up in Chicago, trying to save the city and ultimately the world from these creatures that are impossible to stop. Normally I would be rolling my eyes at the far-fetched events of this film. But I have to admit, in watching the movie, I noticed something very important. It didn't take itself seriously. And the film creators knew that. And in that, it strove above Michael Bay and most other creators of the action film schlock genre. These movie makers should look to this film, and their ilk, for how far to take their seriousness and cartoonishness. Because it was ridiculous seeing Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson going toe-to-toe with Godzilla-like monsters. I would have laughed at it, but for some reason it fit in there, as if seeing Bugs Bunny and Drag in the old cartoons. It doesn't make a lick of sense, but it fit well, and ended up being pretty enjoyable. As long as you realize that it was just a ride, and you should enjoy it as such, not look any deeper into it. And in that, you see where Michael Bay has gone wrong repeatedly. I don't really want to go into a large Transformer tirade against him, but please bear with me. See, Michael Bay couldn't decide what he wanted the Transformer films to be. Serious films? And perhaps please the fans of Transformers, cartoons, and comics? Or make a movie for his ideal demographic, one he's comfortable with, the teenage boys, with having fast cars, fast girls, and explosions galore. You would figure that both would fit perfectly with each other, but they didn't. And he was stuck jumping in between each idea and the other, and pleasing only moviegoers that weren't either. Well, maybe more the latter. And in the end, we saw expressions of his frustration and resentment with the films that he was making. A movie about a series of toys from the 1980s. So, let's add Transformer nuts dangling to robots peeing, and disregard any kind of story, or even any form of continuity to have, at very least, an idea for the audience to lean on. It was devoid of anyone caring to make that movie. Rampage here kept itself steady. It was a film that knew what it was, and those involved in it actually cared about the simple little film. It showed us how, by the characters playing very basic roles with only the minimalist of depth, and that let us know how the film was going to be, very basic with the minimalist of depth. Just like the video game. And in that, it succeeded in being fun, strangely enough. And Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's constantly positive acting was a perfect addition to it, and made it all the more enjoyable, even up to the positive ending. Even though it didn't make a bit of sense in any way, it had a positive beat, and in the end, we all left feeling better, as if we were kids again and just came back from McDonald's with our Happy Meals. On a side note, I was looking up the rating for this movie on Rotten Tomatoes, and I noticed that their critic rating has this movie at 50%, but the audience rating in the same movie is going at about 82%. Lately, I've noticed that the people working at Rotten Tomatoes must not be paying much attention to this discrepancy, or they're constantly passed out drunk with their rating system vastly skewed in terms of differentials between audience and critics. But I'm told that it's just an aggregator, and they have no control over it. But is Rotten Tomatoes managed by a group of drunk frat boys that don't tweak their aggregator's algorithm? Because it is way off the mark in this discrepancy, over and over again, with so many different movies lately. Well, as for my rating, I'm gonna give it 8 naked people from the original Rampage video game. I always did love chasing after them and munching them. But all in all, this movie was a pleasant journey, by modern day standards, and definitely made me rethink this genre. At least for a nice afternoon popcorn munch at the theater, where I can put my brain on the shelf and not worry about it. What do I know? I'm just a cookie.